Welcome to another episode of the Impossible Life podcast. I'm your co-host, Nick Surface, and I'm sat next to a man so patriotic, he literally bleeds red, white, and blue. That's right, friends, the former Navy SEAL. Garrett Unkelbach, a man whose heart pumps freedom 1,776 times a day.
That's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. I did that one partially for you, but mostly for our guest.
Absolutely.
Because
you can say the same.
It's a little bit of banter. Well, not 1,776 times because that's American. We have from the UK, Dean Stott with us. Dean, welcome to the Impossible Life.
I just meant that he also bleeds red, white, and blue.
Yeah, that's true. Well,
yeah,
would you bleed the Union Jack, or would you just bleed red and white for the St. George Cross? That's the question, because people over here don't know the difference.
Red, white, and blue. My father was born in Scotland as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
And your wife is Scottish, correct?
My wife is Scottish, yeah, and I was born in England, so it gets quite exciting around here when England play rugby against Scotland.
Yeah. Did you watch the? What was the? Oh, man, I just blanked on it. I want to say Rugby Sevens, but that's not it. It's what was the most recent one? Can't even remember.
Oh, the rugby. It was it's probably the Six Nations back early.
Six Nations.
Yeah. Six Nations is always something to look forward to after Christmas. Is the Six Nations, which actually when I was growing up, it was the Five Nations. But we now, so it's for the listeners, it's Scotland, England, Ireland, and Wales from the UK, and then we now have France and Italy.
Yeah. And it is actually a lot of fun because those are some of the top nations with Italy's decent, but there's always good. And my father-in-law is Welsh, which is funny because when I moved to the UK, I thought Wales was just like a state, which is so insulting to Welsh people. I didn't even know it was a country. Then I married his daughter.
Well, we jumped ahead. Go ahead and introduce.
I was going to say, let me give the intro to Dean. If you watch Netflix and you've seen Toughest Force on Earth, then you know who Dean is. But
if you haven't, you need to go watch it. It's fun.
Well, we will talk about that, but I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Dean. So he grew up in Aldershot, England. Dean's a former soldier in the Special Boat Service, the SBS, and his military career was ended by a parachuting accident in 2011. However, he quickly transitioned to the private security sector and carved out a reputation, listen to this, for being willing to take on any job, no matter how dangerous, what man doesn't want that in his bio? That's just such a flex. I love that. So from extortions to kidnapping, civil war, pirates, military coups, Dean has seen it all, including he single-handedly, and we're going to get more into this, evacuated the Canadian embassy in Libya, rescuing 22 people in 2014. He has since become a record-breaking explorer and adventurer, which we'll cover, while establishing a successful career as a motivational speaker. He emphasizes his belief that with the right mindset and plan, the impossible simply means it hasn't been done yet, which we love. He published his book Relentless in 2019, which we will talk more about. It's a book that recounts his experiences and life as a Special Boat Services soldier. And when faced with the impossible, he proves that literally anything is possible. He's passionate about mental health campaigning. He set himself with the task to raise £1 million for charity on behalf of his bike ride across the Pan American Highway, which is over 14,000 miles. We're going to go into that. While he did that ride, he set 2 world records on that, completed in only 99 days, 12 hours, and 56 minutes, which was 17 full days ahead of the previous record. He's now on the newly released Netflix show, Toughest Forces on Earth, which just came out on May 22nd, which you definitely should watch. It is very entertaining. I watched it with my wife. And that follows 3 former special ops soldiers, an Army Ranger, British Special Forces operator, who's obviously Dean, and a U.S. Navy SEAL, which we're partial to on this show. And they travel the world on a mission to go deep inside the most elite and secretive military units on the planet. So other than that, Dean's just like any guy that you'll meet, down at your local pub if you're in England, or just at any coffee shop here in America. So, Dean, what a bio, man. Welcome on.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah, just like any other father, you'll still see me picking up the kids from school and, running around trying to change diapers on my youngest. There's no change.
I love that. How old is your youngest?
So my youngest is 20 months now.
Okay.
She was actually born the day before we set off and filmed the very first episode.
Oh, my God.
Wow. That was good timing. Man, your wife was the same. To be like,
I know. You can imagine, obviously, because it'd been literally 3 years from the initial phone call to where we are now. And so there was plenty of dates to drop in. And then finally, when they secured the first date, I had to tell them I need to be late 24 hours. And so, they started filming the first. Well, they didn't start filming. They got there a day before me.
Yeah.
It was the USA one, thankfully. It wasn't like Jordan or Malaysia.
Right. Some crazy place to get into.
Yeah. So, okay, that makes sense. And we were referring to the Netflix show, which we're going to get more into.
Dean, before we jump into anything, I want to pick up on something that Nick said in your bio, which more importantly than in your bio, it's in your life, who cares what someone says about you, more so what you've lived. And you've lived a life not just in one event, but throughout. You've shown it in the military, you've shown it what you've done out in the military, you've shown it in what you've done from a charity perspective, you've shown in what you've done from an athletic perspective of doing the impossible. And if you listen to this show, in our intro, I quote a lesson that I learned from the SEAL teams, which is that the ability to do anything that's impossible starts with the mindset of, if I had to, where did it take? Like, the SEAL teams really taught me that. But will you talk about how did you become someone who looks at the impossible and says, I can do that?
Yeah, it's something that it wasn't born with it at all. It's something that's evolved over my life. Even for, probably the military was a huge part in that. I joined the army at 17. I had no aspirations of being in the military myself. And when I approached my father and told him of my wishes, he was also a military man himself for 22 years. He told me I'd last 2 minutes. And so for me, that's always been a driving force for me to prove people wrong, and not to then show them the middle finger, just to show that you can argue with someone till you're blue in the face. If they disagree with you, then you're not going to change their perspective or their thought process. So the best course of action is action itself. Is just go away, do it, and then come back to the table. And that's what I did with my father. Once he saw that I'd gone to the careers office and I was actually being serious about that, then his whole mindset and his support changed completely. He helped me along the way. But I joined the military at age of 17. I was 5'7". I weighed 130 pounds soaking wet.
Wow.
I wasn't the person in front of the camera today. And so I didn't really have that mindset of anything was possible. For me, it was all about, right, what do I need to do, to get through to the next day? And for me, the basic training in the army was 10 weeks. So I did the 10 weeks basic training, and then I did my 12 weeks combat engineering. And then I went on and then did my commando course at the age of 18. But each time I was doing a course, physically, I was getting stronger and I was getting bigger. Within 18 months, I'd gone from 130 pounds to nearly 200 pounds and grew 4 inches in height as well. So that was the other benefit of the military. You get free square meals a day. And so physically, I was getting strong, but mentally, I was also getting stronger as well. I could see that I was actually not only passing... You had to change
uniforms like 3 different times.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, the quartermaster didn't like me. He's like, "Sure, you're not burning these." Like, no, I'm just growing. But then I could see that I was not only passing the courses, but I was actually doing quite well at them. And before I knew it, I was then starting to become like top student, and I was competing with the top guys. And then, so for me, I just loved that competitiveness. I got that from my father, and my father was in his career he was a military sportsman. So he was we call them tracksuit soldiers. Yeah. Basically, they don't wear uniforms; they just wear tracksuits and trainers. So he was like the Ted Lasso for the UK Army. Now I've watched Ted Lasso. I know he's nothing like Ted Lasso.
Yeah.
But he was the soccer army soccer player, army coach, and everything else. And so there was always that competitive drive growing up from him about competition. But I could now then put this into play in the military. And so my career in a short period of time, by the age of 21, I was an airborne commando diver and PTI. I was now actually at 21, was an instructor on the All Arms Commando course, which was one of the tier 2 special forces. And so for me, my career was literally, I was just looking at everyone else and they were going to tier 1. And I was always, from the army, being a commando, you're almost a small unit within the Royal Marines. So every time I was doing something, I was always being an ambassador or flying the flag for a certain unit and so I always wanted to compete against the Marines. I was always wanted to be the best, to stand out, not give them any excuse to sort of criticize the army at all. And then when I then decided to go tier 1 special forces, rather than going to the SAS, which is like your Delta Force, I went to the SBS, which is like SEAL Team 6. But unlike here in the US, where Delta Force have their selection and SEAL Team 6 has theirs, ours is actually joint. And so, again, I'm always put myself in positions where I'm under the spotlight and you have to perform and perform well. And so I like that. I don't have any self-induced pressure. I sort of believe in my capabilities, but sort of answering to your original question about 10 minutes ago is is the fact that this sort of evolved through my time in the military. It's something I wasn't born with. People ask me, is it nature or nurture? And I generally believe this was nurture for me.
But I feel like there is something that was with you from the beginning, because you said the way you phrased it was with your father, that your father said you couldn't, and you saw that you could. And that's really what perspective is. Perspective is what you see. It's something really that I've learned from my own story. And so your father saw one thing, you saw something different, and you believed in what you saw. Why did you have, where do you feel like that belief came? And I'm just, because I really care about mindset. And so then this is some of the things we talk about in the show all the time. You had a belief that your father didn't have in you. So where did that come from? I
think you have to have that self-belief, if that makes sense, if that makes any sense to you. Someone can't tell you that you can't do it. Only you know if you're capable of doing something. Yeah. And so for me, it's my father can only compare his career. He thought I was going to have a career similar to his. He wasn't aware of my capabilities. I was 16, 17. I hadn't been tested yet. I hadn't been put into those situations that he's had before. Right. And so for me, I think the only person who can really answer that question is yourself. As you touched on, Nick, earlier with my bike ride, when I decided I was going to do this bike ride, I'd only cycled 20 miles before I applied for a record. Which is crazy. A lot of people were like, well, you can't do this. The cyclists, you can't do this. And I was like, you don't know me. You don't know my mindset. You don't know my strengths. I've been tested mentally and physically before. All I need to do is just put this into this. So really the mindset comes from yourself. It has to be your self-belief, because if you don't believe yourself that you can do it, then you've already failed. Yeah, that's right. But I think if you do believe in yourself that you can do it, and then others see that, whether it's my father or whether it's other cyclists out there, and they see you performing, then they'll get behind you. But yeah, you're the only one who can make that decision, and that's what I like to do. I said I don't like to argue with them. I like to just go away. Best course of action is action itself. Just go do it.
Something they say about SEALs, which you'll probably appreciate, but I'd be curious your opinion on it. Something they would say in SEAL training is that SEALs aren't made; they show up to be trained.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, again, it's that nature and nurture that you have they turn up. You have almost like a block of concrete, right? And they will then start carving away at what they want from you.
That's what you have. All the things that you learned in the military, that's where you turned it into this ability to do the impossible. But what you started, your block of concrete, was the self-belief.
Yeah, the block of concrete has to be the self-belief. And I went out. So before you join the army, we had almost like this 3-day acquaint where you go to a training establishment and you speak to other recruits who are going through training themselves, and get some feedback from them. And I mean, there's a little bit of physical PT stuff in there. And I remember we do like a 1.5 mile BFT. It's a run, 1.5 miles, and I ended up sprinting it. Sprint as fast as I could in about 8 minutes 15. Jeez. Which was actually quite fast for a young kid. And then PTI is like, you'll never do that again. But actually, they came back and they said, I got an A for that. I got an A for, bit of discipline and things like that. So for me, even that at the very start of just that report coming back gave me that little bit of confidence. But yeah, I just think I don't like naysayers, because the people I think there's 3 types of people in the world. There's those who can do it and is well within their capabilities, or easily exceed, and they will encourage you to come along. There's those that definitely can never do it in their life, and they will still encourage you. And there's those that are on par with you, and they see you stepping forward, and they want to pull you back. And I think they're the 3 types of groups. So for me was, my father was probably the one on the level playing field with me. He's like, oh my God, he's going to go. Yeah. And to be honest though, after, within a short period of time, my career was very different from his. He loved the fact that I did it. And I do think it was reverse psychology now in reflection.
Right. Because you had a good relationship with your dad by all accounts, right? Like you guys had a great relationship.
Yeah, I had a great relationship. Going back slightly, my parents split up when I was 8 years old, and my mother got custody of me and my 2 sisters, and we went to Manchester.
Yeah.
a place called Moss Side. We ended up in a homeless home in Moss Side in Manchester. So at a very young age, I was already fighting in the playgrounds. But my father was still in the military. He got promoted to regimental sergeant major and was going to get posted to Germany, but he put his career on hold. He paused, he turned down the promotion, stayed in UK, and every 2 weeks he would drive 240 miles one direction to pick me and my sisters up, to take us down for 72 hours and then bring us back. So that was a bit of respite from me from the life that I had in Manchester. I mean, my father were very close. And then, that was 85. In 1987, when I was 10, it finally went to head in court. And the judge was like, well, I'm not going to split the siblings up. They make the decision who they live with. And me being the eldest of the three, I had to make the decision at the age of 10 who I wanted to live with, my father or my mother, which was really difficult at the time. But naturally, I was close to my father. I probably needed that father figure around me.
Yeah. Yeah, and Moss Side's still rough to this day. I mean, that's brutal.
It is brutal. Yeah, I'm fortunate sometimes when I go back to UK, I guest speak at the Manchester United Foundation.
Let's go, my team.
Yeah, but I'm a Chelsea man. I'll go up there, and but a lot of the kids there come from Moss Side and Fallowfield, where I grew up, and they walk in and like, well, we've got nothing in common with this guy. You got Marcus Rashford, who plays for Manchester United, who's from Moss Side, and then you got me. Then when I tell them my story, they're like, oh, the pin drops to them. Yeah. So,
and for those of you that are listening, you're like, oh, 240 miles. Like that's a run from LA to San Diego. In the UK, this is like driving from like the tip of Minnesota to the southern tip of Texas mentally. People don't get that in the US, that's a long drive. It's like 4 hours it would take you to do that, right?
Yeah, 4 hours in good traffic. 4 hours in good traffic. Yeah, normally 6 hours on a Friday evening. Because our roads aren't as clear as they are here in the US.
No, exactly. You got it was built on a different infrastructure when cars did not exist. So
true.
One of the fun things of going to the UK. No, very good. Well, thank you, Garrett, for just taking question one. Now, Dean, I got to ask you, was there a point that you moved from proving your dad wrong to like having real belief? Like, was there a specific point where you're like, I mean, I know you said you got confidence from, because I listened to your story on Jocko's podcast, and I know you were just living the surf dream. Like, oh, I can make enough money, I can surf down here, be near the water, and like we're going for, by all accounts, a typical teenage easy life. And then those words spurned you on from your dad. But was there a point where you're like, okay, it's not about that anymore? Like I
think so. When I joined the military, my father was in the Royal Engineers, I was in the Royal Engineers, and so the first year, 15 months, it was almost mirrored like my father's career. I got into the Royal Engineers. And my father, as I touched on, was the Army soccer player, manager, and coach. So as soon as they got wind, my surname, and that was Dave Stott's son, that was it. I was shipped off to Germany because they were the Army soccer champions. And so, so straight away, I was now then working in the gym as the PTI. And literally all I would do is play soccer every day. We would train every morning between 9 and noon. We'd have our own masseuses. We'd have a big game on the Wednesday. You know, you're living almost like a semi-professional footballer. And so it was really, when I think, as you read in the book, I made a decision, right, if I carry on, I'm just going to be like mirroring my father. I'm not actually carving my own path. And so that's when I decided that I was then going to go do the commando course. And I remember my father dropped me off and he said, these boys will sort you out, sort of thing. You know, but he'd never done the commando course and anything like that. So this was something that was unique that he hadn't done before.
So I'm not super familiar with all of the courses. What is the commando course? What all is entailed in that?
So in the UK, our Tier 2 Special Forces comprises of the Royal Marine Commandos and the Parachute Regiment. And so what you then have is you have army units attached to those brigades. So the Royal Engineers airborne guys are 9 Parachute Squadron, and I was in the Royal Engineers, and I was going to go with 5-9 Commandos. So you basically do the Royal Marine Commando course condensed in 10 weeks. It's to earn the coveted Green Beret.
Right.
And so I decided that I was going to do that, and because they were based in North Devon, which is great surfing as well.
What's the failure rate like on the commando course?
So the failure rate on the commando course, you're probably still talking about 60% on them. But what they do have, what the Royal Engineers and Royal Artillery do, they have their own, they call it a beat up. They have their own 4-week beat up, which literally, if you don't pass that, you then don't go on the commando course. So the majority of that 60% is done before you go there. And it basically involves, and it's really a strange course because unlike the Royal Marines, where they just come from civilian, it's a 9-month course and then they're out. Some of the people on the commando course, the All Arms Commando course, are senior NCOs, they're officers, they're from other units around the British forces. But they then sort of do this course so that they can fight alongside because there's different SOPs within the commandos and the rest of the army. And, it culminates, the final thing is a 30-mile march in 8 hours to get your Green Beret. And then there's all these commando tests along the way. Yeah. And so when I went and did that course and I finished that course, that's when I sort of then believed in myself, because I then realized that actually my career wasn't now mirrored to my father's.
Right. So that was the point.
Yeah. Every time before, when I'm chatting to him about playing soccer, it's something we could chat about. I can now bring something new to the table, which he'd never done before, because he thought I would last. Even then he's like, these boys will sort you out. And then, I then in a short period of time ended up joining the reconnaissance troops for the whole of 3 Commando Brigade. But before that, I think, Nick, you'll know on Jocko's one, I did a little spell in Colchester prison.
I got better for it, by all accounts.
Yeah. I spent 56 days in Colchester prison fighting back in Germany. And I remember ringing my father, telling him I'm off to prison. He's like, that's it, you ruined your career and things like that. And I was like, okay, whatever. So it actually did me good favors, actually, because when I finished, I then went and did my commando course. And the unit I was joining were the Army Minor Units boxing champions. And they were getting ready to fight, go in the Army finals. And they were like, never even seen me box before. They're like, well, you've just come out of prison for 3 assaults, so you're in the boxing team. So actually, it sort of helped me as I joined this new unit. And a few months later, I'm in the ring boxing. And it's the first time some of these guys have even seen me. Some have been to Northern Ireland on tour. Some guys are instructors elsewhere. And I remember them saying, who's this Stotty lad? And I don't know. And then, fortunately, I locked down my opponent 3 times in less than a minute. And so that gave me a good foothold in the commando forces. And then I was very fortunate in a short period of time to then go back as an instructor on the commando course. And then spent 8 years with 3 Commando Brigade in the reconnaissance troops.
Was that last march on the commando that's where they mess with guys when you get to your final checkpoint? They're like, okay, your next checkpoint. Because you told that story and it made me think of Garrett's land nav, because obviously I'm not military or special forces, and nor am I want to be, but like I love hearing the stories. And can you share that story, because they mess guys up? Is that the same march where they mess guys up like that and get them to quit?
We do mess with their heads a bit on that one, but the one you're on about, so the one on the commando course is basically they have one last water stop, and they've got to cover 30 miles in 8 hours, but you as the instructor are leading them all the way, which is actually, it's probably harder for them, because they're not really, all they're focusing on is just following your feet. But the last hill that we do before they drop into to the finish is called Pooper's Hill, and it has 7 false summits. Oh. So every time we go, I say, just over this hill, lads, and they're like, I mean, literally, it's just like 7 false summits. It's just depleting their energy, and then we come in. But no, the one you're referencing, Nick, is selection for Tier 1 Special Forces. The first month is called the Hills Phase, and it's in and around Beacons in Wales. And you're basically you're doing checkpoints A to B to C, map reading on your own with 70 to 80 pounds on your back. Because unlike the Tier 2 Special Forces, the Commandos and the Paras, which and as with the SEALs, is very team based. It's about working together as a team. This one, you almost have to be self motivated, so you're on your own. Yeah, you're doing everything on your own. But I know that some of the guys in the parachute regiment, they would volunteer as drivers on the selections before, so they can get almost like a familiarization of the routes, the checkpoints, where they are. always helped. If units are willing to give them time there, then of course it helps. And so we had a couple of parachute regiment guys on ours who had done that before. And I remember coming into a checkpoint. It was actually supposed to be the end. And in their head, that this is the last checkpoint of the day. And then the instructor was like, right, guys, get your maps out. And he sort of gave them the new coordinates. And you have to do time, speed, distance. They work out how far it is, and you work on an average of 4K an hour as the crow flies. You sort of tell them how long you're going to be. So it's easy. It's like 15 minutes for a mile. But they want it down to the second, when they're doing the dimension. And so these guys' faces, you could see them. They were broken because in their heads they'd finished for the day.
Yeah.
And they ended up stopping. I mean, I ended up because I didn't have an opportunity to go around the hills and have a look. So I really didn't even know whether it was the end of the day or not. I just kept going. Yeah. And then so I ran off. I started running off, and the instructor shout. He sees me go off for a good 100 meters and screaming and shouting. So I look back, and he calls me back. He said, "No, it's finished." He just was testing them. But those guys voluntarily withdrew before, because in their head they were already in their head they only had that certain amount that they had to do that day. Yeah. And it's just really.
I knew you'd love that story.
Yeah, that's so good. One of the lessons I learned from the SEAL teams, it's just so analogous to life, where people quit, is what I call the unknown distance run. Mm-hmm. We have in BUDS the 4 mile timed runs, right? So it starts at 32 minutes. It goes all the way down to 28 by the end of SEAL training for a 4 mile timed run on the beach. But then we have the other runs, conditioning runs, where you have to follow an instructor. And you probably know who Eddie Gallagher is. He was one of my first phase instructors.
Okay.
And he would just take off on a run, and you don't know if Eddie's going to run for 5 miles or if he's going to run for 30. Yeah, right? Like you don't know. They don't tell you. It's just, and we did some of both. Yeah. And guys would quit on those runs where it's like, we're 6 hours in, on a run, and they're like, we're not stopping anytime soon. And guys quit. And there was a guy in my class who quit, who was a professional runner. Like, he was sponsored by Adidas, world class. He was a better runner than anybody on the beach that day, instructors included. And he quit on an unknown distance run because the way they made him feel is like, you're never going to get to the finish line. And he believed it.
Have you ever heard of clean PT and dirty PT? Have you heard this?
No, what's that term?
Something I reference. I picked up from one of the old SBS guys. We were chatting about it before. So there's a lot of people say that there's a lot of similarities between special forces and professional athletes. Yeah. And I think there are crossovers, but I think there are very much a lot of differences between the special forces and so I call it clean PT and dirty PT. So the athletes, so that runner, for example, is used to clean PT. So whether it's a professional footballer, an NFL guy, how long is the NFL? Is it 80 minutes? Is that right?
That's 60. 4 15-minute quarters.
Wow. Even easy.
You're not missing anything.
Them guys are easy. Well, these guys know that, all they need to do is perform for 60 minutes. Prior to the game, they've got the best nutrition, they've got the best support. When they finish their game, they've got an ice bath, they've got a masseuse. That's it. They're not expecting anything longer than that 60 minutes. So that's classed as clean PT. Whereas in the special, and their motivations are money, the crowd, and things like that. That's what keeps them going. Because in the special forces, as you touched on, you could then, you could parachute in and then yomp 15 miles and realize actually, we now need to go even further. And you've probably twisted your ankle at some point as well. So you've got a self-strap. And so a lot of professional sport people struggle in the special forces world. Your calorific intake is down. You're not sleeping as much as you should be. Things change on the ground. You're not running for 60 minutes on a football field. You're running for 8 hours over 30 miles. And so, there are a lot of synergies, but a lot of differences as well. So I call it the clean PT and the dirty PT. But special forces operators can operate in clean PT very easy, but it's very hard to go from clean to dirty.
That's well said. It's actually what I loved about SEAL training was the dirty PT part, because I was a good athlete. I was never a great athlete. And so I was never at the bottom of the pack when it came to athletics, but I was never the star. And what I found in military and SEAL training was the dirty PT, when they start to introduce the elements of fear and pain and chaos, I was like, man, it became a competitive advantage to me where it's like I could never outrun that guy. But when we're tired, when you're panicking, I'm faster than you. Okay, I like these elements because it allows me to perform.
Yeah.
Garrett's good at that. All right, so getting back to this, man. So like you said, I'm gonna look at when you had the parachuting accident in 2011, right? Did you had a self-confessed identity crisis when you exited the military? So what did you learn from that, and like how did you find your identity once you left?
Yeah, so for the listeners, after 16 years, I had that parachuting accident on the exit, and so we're about to go back out to Afghanistan in 2 weeks' time. It was pre-deployment training. It was literally our last.
What was the accident? Sorry, Dean. What was the just as a jump master? I'm curious. What was the parachute?
Oh yeah, so we were doing a hey-ho jump. So actually on the tour before we did, I was fortunate to do the first ever operational jump in Afghan.
Wow. Yeah, because those are
target. Yeah. And then we did one actually on the east coast of Somalia doing a hostage rescue. So when we were going back out,
sorry, buddy. I said I know that operation.
Yeah. So when we went back out, going back out to Afghanistan, we had obviously some new guys come into the squadron, so they had to go get hey-ho trained. So the sergeant major's like, well, go, the rest of you guys go do some fun jumps. And I always believe that the military take a great sport and they mess it up, whether it's skiing, diving, or parachuting. So there's no such thing as fun. Yeah. So we would, so if you as a jump master would know this then. So I used to love being number one on the stick because I would then frog it. I would turn back and sort of face the jump master, just have a little mess around, which used to always wind up the jump masters. And it's almost a signature for the SEALs and for the SBS. And so basically for the listeners is rather than jumping outwards on the tailgate and facing where you should do, you turn last minute, you turn in the air, face back in, and you almost look like a frog. And so on the third jump of the day, my team leader's like, Stott, you get in the middle of the stick because you keep messing. Okay. So I ended up, jumping again. But as I exited on the hey-ho, I did my compulsory count, and I should now be looking, should look up to check that I've got a canopy and then obviously do all my checks. But as I opened my eyes, I was actually looking the wrong way. I was actually looking up. My back was arched, and my ankle was caught in the line above my head.
Yeah.
So I was frantically, I didn't have long and literally had seconds to try and kick it out before the static line opened. And it didn't. It pulled my leg over my head and to my right. And thankfully my heel cleared. And so, and at 15,000 feet, as you know, anything higher, you have to go onto oxygen. So that's why they do it at 15,000. And with a hey-ho, you can travel up to 30 minutes or 50 kilometers to the target area, depending on the winds. And so for me, I just had this immense feeling of pain I'd never really felt before. I have a good pain threshold, but nothing like this at all. And because of the air was so thin, I was drifting out of consciousness. And then I was also vomiting because of the pain. I mean, as I was descending, obviously the air's a lot better. I could now see the rest of the team. And there's no point, I had comms with them, but there's no point in trying to tell them that I've got a problem because there's nothing we can do until we land. And so I just followed them. I just followed the stick. On the DZ, we had the NATO T, which gives you directions of the winds. And so I was closely watching the other guys, see which was the best approach. And I landed one-legged. It was a good landing. But straight away called the medic. And one of my friends was like, that was a good landing. I was like, the exit wasn't. And they literally took me from that DZ to the hospital, had an MRI scan. I tore my ACL, my MCL, my lateral meniscus in my knee, my hamstring, my calf, and my quadricep. So all the muscles, all the support.
Is there anything you didn't tear? Is probably the shorter question.
Yeah, probably my Achilles. My Achilles was still intact. That was it. But
oh man, that's rough.
So for me, it was the identity crisis you referenced to, Nick, was my friends all went off to Afghanistan. It was the same time as the Iceland volcano, which had erupted and grounded all majority of aircraft. And so I was in Muscat in a hotel just with painkillers for about 4 weeks until they could get an Aeromed to me and back to the UK. Yeah. And then there was a whole spiral of errors there where they lost medical documentation and things like that. So I was told, thank you for your service, but, it's time to leave. So my identity crisis was I'd spent from the age of 17 to 33 doing this job. And I never had any plans on leaving. I was a lifer. I would still be in now to the age of 55. So almost like that just taken completely from you. You know, what is my role? Yeah. Where do I fit now in society? What skill sets do I have that I can offer? And so, yeah, it was hard for me. And I got to where I had through my sort of physical attributes. And I now couldn't even run 100 meters without my knee giving way. You know, a few months before, the squadron were briefing up the Prime Minister on hostage rescues. Now I was like, you know, what am I going to do? But thankfully for me, my wife was very entrepreneurial. She literally picked up the role of the military for me. I always say they're like your father and your mother. They clothe you, they feed you, they pay you on time, they provide the gas, they provide the electric. So you can just focus on your job. You don't need to be worrying about these distractions. And so thankfully for me, Alana sort of did that. She picked that role up for me and let me just concentrating on getting better again.
Yeah. What was your biggest lesson from that? Like, was there a point that shifted you out of that? Because that is a massive, you know, especially if you built your confidence from all that you accomplished and suddenly everything that you were really good at was like, oh, we're not going to let you do that anymore. Was there a point where it kind of clicked in, where you're like, okay, this is how I got to get myself back up? Or
not straight away. I think it over a period of time it did. You know, my first job, and my main worry as well, to add to the pressure of leaving the military, my wife was 8 months pregnant. I didn't have a job lined up. I didn't know if there was going to be any work, how I could support her. Thankfully, you know, it was the Arab Spring in May 2011. Within 48 hours of getting out, I was offered a security job to help set up the British Embassy in Benghazi. And so straight away, this is when the entrepreneur started. I didn't realize I was an entrepreneur, but thinking about alternative options. A lot of my friends were off the east coast of Somalia doing maritime security. You know, they were killing it. So I didn't want to be competing with them. I didn't want to be going out to Afghan and Iraq every 6 weeks on a rotation as well. So I found out that corporate close protection is where the money's at, you know, the 5-star hotels and a bit. So I was like, okay, let's focus on that. And Alana actually trained as well prior to that, doing CP and surveillance. But when she found out months before that she was pregnant with our daughter, she sort of managed the back of house. But when I was there, I soon identified that there's a lot of security companies, and I never name and shame, I call them the big five, who were charging 7-figure sums for crisis management and evacuation plans, which weren't actually in place. And so during the Arab Spring, there was a huge proliferation of weapons. And so I said to Alana, I think I have a plan. And I went back into Libya after 2 weeks. 2 weeks in Libya, flew home. She gave birth to Molly, and I went back in. And I just bought 30 weapons on the black market, and I buried them between Tunis and Egypt with comms kit and some money, and just designed my own evacuation plans. And nothing that we didn't do in the special forces. I was just trying to then put it into the corporate world. Right. And yeah, I just sold that to the oil and gas sector, and never needed it for a while. And then I was doing a lot of corporate close protection, and in a short period of time, I was understanding more about the security industry that I hadn't seen before when you're in the military. When you're in the military, you only see what they show you, right. You know, what your mission is. And, you know, you're not blinkered. You do have a bigger picture. But when you're out and you have more movement and more visibility, you know, I was starting to learn a lot more about these places. And for me, it was, you know, I was doing some great tasks, and each phone call I was getting was a different mission, whether it's taking the UAE Royal Family super yacht from Barcelona to Maldives, training the Kurdish special forces to fight ISIS. You know, next one, I'm down in South Africa on a high profile court case. So straight away, you know, I was building up a great network. Yeah. I'd just finished the London Olympics in 2012, and it was when your American ambassador got killed in Benghazi, September 11, 2012. I was there that night, and I evacuated an oil company, a German oil company, from Benghazi back to Tripoli through safe houses I had. And it was then that I then realized I had something that was different from other security providers. The way that we sort of operated was slightly different. Majority of the guys I use are all locals. But what I was doing from my time in the military, you know, everyone has this perception of special forces of what Hollywood portrays, right. The biceps, the bullets and the bombs. Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham don't do us any favors.
Right.
But, that's 25% of what we do is that offensive action, which is actually the last resort. That's not our go-to all the time. 50%, Garrett will tell you, is hearts and minds, support and influence, understanding the demographics, the politics and the tribal influences. And that's what I'd really honed in on. And that's what I was working on. So the Canadian Embassy, 2 years later, 18 military and 4 diplomats, because of the success of the one in 2012, that's when I got the phone call. And I didn't need 6 or 7 guys looking like me armed. All I needed was a fixer and 2 fish wagons. And that was the success of that. So I always looked at different ways of being able to execute missions without, raising too much profile.
So I don't even know what a fixer and a fish wagon is, man. I got to ask the question. Do you know what that is, G?
Yeah, Dean, I was going to ask you on the language barrier. How did you overcome that? Are you a great linguist, or was that just relationships that you found everywhere you went? Someone who could help you? Yeah,
no, I'm not. 2 things. If I could go back in time and be a young child again, I would play the guitar, and I'd learn a language. No, for me, I always get it when I used to go into these countries. Do you speak Arabic? And I was like, shway, shway, which means little, little. And they don't know if I do or I don't. But no, it was just literally just through relationships. And the way I sort of built up those relationships as well. So our security company is just me and my wife. We're quite nimble, quite small, but we can upscale and downscale quite quickly. As you read in my book, Nick, there was an incident with the Prime Minister of Libya who asked me for some help, and within a week I had 150 special forces guys from around the world. So I can upscale and downscale. But where I built these relationships is I tend to work on my own a lot. So I remember an example going into Somalia, into Mogadishu, and everyone was at the air base. Everyone stays at the air base. I was like, I'm not going to get anything here at the air base. What I needed to do, I needed to go out. And so I went out of the wire, literally landed, grabbed my bags and just walked to the nearest hotel, which is actually called the Peace Hotel, ironically. And the hotel manager gave me an AK and a pistol. And I was there doing some networking, trying to help one of the biggest security companies get established there. And I ended up meeting a few people. And when they take me to the house, there obviously got to be an element of trust. You got to trust them. You don't always believe people that are bad, but you can normally get that. You can almost have a sixth sense on the atmospherics. I'm not naive to think that the place is totally safe. It's not. But I would sit there and I would share food and water and coffee with him and his family on the floor. And, he would say, look, I get phone calls or emails all the time from security providers all over the world wanting my services and wanting this. He goes, but you've come here, you've taken the risk, you understand now the layout of the land. And so that is how I built the relationships, not by emailing people and getting their contact details. That's the easiest thing to do, is by physically going into the country and meeting these people as well. Because I call it the media monster. The media monster doesn't help matters. You have a perception of what a country's like. When I say Mogadishu, everyone thinks Black Hawk Down.
Right.
Which is fine. There are places like that. There are dangerous places within Mogadishu, but when I go spearfishing. We get lobsters just off the coast and just stick it on the barbie on the beach. But so that's how I've ended up building those relationships, by physically going in and meeting people as well. Because everyone can tarnish a certain community with one brush because of a minority have done something bad, but you can do that for all communities. So for me was getting as many locals as I can. And the way that we operate, or we try to operate, is if we can give as much work to the locals, then we will do so. We won't bring in our own teams. And so if you're paying them or you're putting food and water on their tables to them and their family, they want it to be a success. They want it to work. It's a bit of give and take.
Yeah. I want to pause on the story that you just told, just for some of our brothers who might be listening. Dean, I get to talk to some other special operators that they're struggling in their own transition. Yeah. And some of the things, some of the elements in the story you just told, and really the power of building relationship, that's a skill that's valuable, in the military, and, the kind of the paramilitary community that you've been living in, and also in the civilian world. I took some of the things that I learned in the military about developing a network, developing a relationship, and I use that to be successful in the civilian world. It's some of the most valuable skills that we have. And, you know, sometimes guys are like, man, how does my ability to jump out of an airplane and set a door charge and use a sniper rifle, how does this translate? Those things don't necessarily translate. The professionalism and discipline you learn around those things translate. But it's some of these other skills around relationship, developing a network, knowing how to trust, who to trust and how to trust people, how to make decisions without all the answers. It's incredibly valuable skills in the business network. And what you did was business, but in any aspect of business, those things are very valuable.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I know a lot of guys and girls when they're leaving that they worry that, you know, because we don't have the luxury in the UK as you do in the US that, you know, when you leave, you're entitled to go do a degree. Is that right? In university? I
had, so when I left, I didn't get a degree, but when I left, and I have no college courses to my name, but when I left, they said I had like 60 or 70 hours of 120 hours in a degree. So I had like half of a degree based upon my military experience.
Wow. Yeah, and I mean, you can continue that because you're a veteran. You get that. So we don't get that.
Well, and it would have been free. I wouldn't have had to pay for it.
Yeah, so we don't get that in the UK, anything like that at all. So I know a lot of my friends are worried, like, well, I don't have a degree or any education. So how am I, you know, and I've been in the military since I was 16, 17. You know, how am I going to compete with those in the corporate world? And I always say that, you know, there's so many skill sets that we have from the military, which we totally underestimate. Yes, there's those particular skill sets, being able to fire an M60 or things like that. But as you touched on, the communication skills, the leadership skills, you know, being able to talk to people, you know, from all cultures.
Yeah, talk to people who don't look like you or talk like you.
Exactly. You know, being able to make a plan, being able to then change that plan if the situation changes. These things we do day in, day out, which we take for granted, which the corporate world would love. And so for me, when I then started believing in my abilities my wife says, like, my USP is I can talk to anyone, whether you're a member of the royal family or a homeless boy on the street. I'll talk to you exactly the same. There is no airs and graces. And so that is one of my USPs, is I can go anywhere around the world and make friends. But I remember doing a task once in Libya. It was the UK trade investment. Were flying in, all the 4 big oil and gas companies to go pitch to Libya oil and gas. And so these guys won 7-figure sums. These guys were like directors in these oil companies. And I sat and watched the presentations. And of 4 of the presentations, 3 of them were just an absolute mess. You know, their presentations weren't in the right order. They hadn't rehearsed. They weren't comfortable in talking in front of other people. You know, we're in a society now where everyone's like hidden behind screens. Yep. Whereas in the military, you may have to go stand up and deliver a set of orders to your peers. You know what I mean? And so you want to get it right. So the attention to detail, the way that we operate in the military, is what corporates would love in their own team. So yes, there are skill sets we don't have, or degrees that we don't have, but we have so many other skills. So as you know, gents, when you're talking with corporates, you know, they're always fascinated with the mindset of the special forces operator. You know, I call it the battlefield to the boardroom. You know, they're all very much intrigued in how you guys can make key decisions under duress, you know, in life dependent decisions. And so I always find that these corporates, nothing, however big they are, they will never be able to manage the experiences that you get in the military or the exposures. So I always say you can't be experienced without experiences. So for those veterans getting out, when you're getting out, you're not even at a level playing field. I always think you're already ahead. But it's that quote earlier that you have to believe in those abilities.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and maybe the terminology is slightly different as well. The corporate world, you know, I was like, what does that mean? And then when I actually explain what it means in the military world, it's exactly the same thing. It's just terminology and language.
Yeah, you got to take that same self-belief that you joined the military with. Like I've talked with some SEALs as they've left, and I'm like, guys, let me just put a different perspective on it for you. You know, you went into a job where your life was not guaranteed, and you did it courageously. And now you're looking at, and you're working in the civilian world, and you act like if you didn't get paid for 6 months that you would just drop dead. You've been through some of the most difficult circumstances in the world, And every single time you figured it out.
Yeah.
So don't act like if your bank account starts running low, you're just going to drop dead. You'll figure it out. I promise.
I think also my advice to some of them is that always remember that you're not in the military as well. Remember your audience. Like some guys come out and they talk to civilians and they're talking to their teammates like that. Well, that doesn't work. That doesn't really work. So there's that thing they've got to master. But again, I'm talking to you about my successes. I still don't know who what bank account I'm with or gas, electric. My wife does that. Right. Actually, I don't get involved in any of the negotiations on contracts. My wife does that. And I think that's one thing the military could be good at. I don't know how you guys work it here in the US, but in the UK, literally all they taught us to do was write a CV and resume and have interview techniques. I was like, well, I've never had an interview and never needed to write one. But when I'm because I was very naive when I got out thinking, you come from an environment where you have to trust the person next to you with your life. Right. And you always want to help people. That it's the nature. It's the nature of a lot of people from the military. They always want to help people. And I assumed that the civilian world was the same, that people in corporate want to help each other. And my wife's this place is cutthroat. It is like, and they take advantage. I do see it. They take advantage a lot of the veterans because the veterans don't value their worth. When I got out, I was like, there's no way I can charge that. It was almost like 3 times my one month's wage in a week. And she goes, my wife's like, well, why not? There's other people charging more who are less qualified. And so really, it was really understanding that forget about what you're getting paid and what you're doing there. Your value and worth is a lot higher in the corporate world. And so for me, Alana does all the contracts. She does the negotiations, hence how to ask for money. Because, as we come from an environment where if you're planning an operation in Afghanistan and you need Spectre gunship, UAV, I need 3 Black Hawks, I need a squadron of guys and things. That are millions of dollars. No one tells you the cost of that. It's automatically done for you. And so we don't understand about the negotiating factor in business. And so, you've been doing it since the age of 17. And so that's why my wife deals with that, because I'm still very uncomfortable in talking about money. Because, again, we talk about evacuations. I don't see value. I don't see a price on a life. I just feel like I need to get them out. So the Canadian embassy, 18 military and 4 diplomats, I only charged $7,000 for the whole mission.
Wow.
Oh, man.
Because anything over $10,000 was then going to have to get processed through Canada, was going to take about 48 hours. And I didn't have time for that. Yeah. And for me, it was like, well, you don't. And what I don't like to see is people taking advantage of other people's fears and monetizing on it. But so we did that, and that paid for the fixer, his brother who was driving the car with me, and the 2 fish wagons, which go from Tripoli to Tunis. And that's all we needed. But what you then get tenfold, you get that back tenfold as well. So, so my wife deals with all of that side of the house as well. So I would say to those getting out is, have a good either financial advisor or someone that can help you sort of navigate that terminology that you're used to in the military to the corporate sector.
I think you said it perfectly. Like in the military, everything for us is just like a straight price, because what we don't encounter in the military is where business and military is very different. What we don't encounter in the military is sales and marketing. And sales and marketing is a huge expense to business, which inflates the price of anything that you sell. I think that's where special operations guys could cut their teeth really fast and get up to speed in business, is to jump into sales right after they leave.
Yeah, definitely. But there is a lot of guys that go into procurement. Military procurement. Yeah. Salespeople.
You said that Jason Statham doesn't do you any favors. I'm pretty sure you just described like his last 5 movies with all your stories about what you did once you left the military, and you're bald and you're jacked. So I mean, one day when they make your life a movie, 100% it's going to be Jason Statham. He's even got the Cockney accent. It's going to be perfect.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he's probably too skinny though. He's probably too short and skinny.
I heard he's short. I don't know how tall he actually is, but I don't. What are you, about 5'11"?
I think most people on TV are short, aren't they? They'd like him to be. Bigger.
We can just assume he is. We'll find somebody else. All right, man. So I want to move. I want to move to you actually riding the Pan American ride, because we've covered a lot, but I don't want to leave that up because that's so. I mean, like you said, you spent 5 minutes on a bike. So where did you? Someone said, "Hey, you rode 20 miles once." Like, how do you even say, okay, I think I'm going to do this? Because the logistics are a full-time job. And then also, I'm really curious, you're pretty well acquainted with Prince Harry. So I'm curious how that came about. But like, talk us through that, how you go from, okay, I'm in security.
I've barely rode a bike.
Yeah, I barely rode a bike. I've exited well. I'm now doing well for myself in security. I'm guessing that's where you got the mental health campaigners, because you battled with it yourself. Is that correct?
No, it was actually through Harry. Yeah. So the way we got to the bike ride. So the Canadian embassy, which we've touched on.
Yes.
When I came back from that trip, my normal SOP would be charge my mobile phone, launder my clothes, and just get ready for the next task. And my wife was obviously coordinating all that. And there was occasions where I would land, my wife would give me another bag, another passport, and then I'd be gone.
Jeez.
And so on this one, I'd only been home. We sat down that evening, had a couple of bottles of wine, and realized I'd only been home 21 days in a 365-day calendar.
Wow.
Literally disconnected from society. My father died that year. I buried him, and I was on the flight that evening, or the next day, sorry. I just really... So that's when the pin dropped for me, is that I was trying to match it. This was 5 years now after leaving the military.
Right.
I was trying to match the adrenaline rush that I had when I was in the Special Forces without actually coming to terms with the fact that you're no longer in there. And so, I was doing these very high profile jobs and missions, but should something happen on them, I didn't have a Sabre squadron jumping out into the sky to come rescue me. I was on my own. And so my wife, we sat down, and chapter 16 in my book is called Dead or Divorced, which was the conversation we were having at this point. And it was literally like, if you continue at this rate, you will either be dead or you'll be divorced. And what it turned out to be was lack of communication between my wife. We're business partners. She thought I wanted to be away, and I thought she wanted me to be away, to be earning money. Because like I said, I don't deal with the money. She deals it. So I just thought, we need more money. But another job my wife was doing as well, a side job for us, was she was property developing at the time, which was very successful. And she said, look, you don't need to be going away. You don't need to be doing this. And so, okay. So I took a sabbatical from the security industry and then joined my wife property developing. And as I said, it was 5 years after me leaving. My injured leg now was 2 kilograms or 5 pounds lighter than my good leg.
Wow.
Because of the muscle wastage.
Yeah.
And so literally when I used to deploy, all I would take is a TRX with me and just do some stuff in the room. I wasn't doing any cardiovascular stuff. And so her office was only about 8 miles from our house. And so I just bought a push bike off Amazon and cycled to and from the office. And but straight away, being that physically active again, that cardiovascular, getting the lungs going, I just felt like there was a huge weight off my shoulders. But you can imagine, my backstory now, and we now had our second son, our second child, who's our son Tommy. I'm sat in these architects and planners meetings, like bottle feeding my son, while my wife's literally going through all these drawings and plans with these architects, and I was just I wasn't really interested. So she looked over and she could see the glaze in my eyes, and she said, you need to do something. And it was about a month before my 40th birthday. So I said, well, I've always fancied doing a world record. And she said, well, what in? And I said, well, cycling seems to be good because it's not hurting my knee.
Right.
We'd done a lot as well. We skipped over a bit, but even since leaving the military, me and my wife do a lot in the non-profit area anyway. We, especially in the veteran stuff. We were both the ambassadors for the Special Boat Service Association in Scotland. My wife does a lot in and around human trafficking.
Amazing.
And so Harry, as you touched on, Nick, him and I met each other back in 2007 on a JTAC course. And him and I got partnered off together, just were good friends from that 6 weeks together and then onwards. So he would come as a guest sometimes at some of our events, which was all under the radar. I had an intelligence fusion cell based in Mozambique and Tanzania, which identified the smuggling routes of ivory from the continent of Africa to Asia. So I would always, every 3 months, go to the palace and sort of disseminate this. So I rang him up. He was my first port of call when Guinness came back and said, you've been successful on your application. So going back slightly, I skipped that. I said about doing a bike ride. Alana then found the world's longest road, which runs from southern Argentina to northern Alaska.
You want to do a ride? Sure. Here's the longest road in the world.
So I joked that she wanted me out of the house. That she clearly wants me out of the house. And so So for me, I was actually looking at likes of Cairo to Cape Town, but majority of my stuff was in Africa anyway. So what attracted me about that was it was the longest road, but there was countries that I'd never been to before.
Yeah.
And so I said, so I applied for the world record, and Guinness came back 6 weeks later and said, you've been successful on your application. So that's when I rang Harry, told him what I was doing. And then him and his brother and Kate were just about to launch a mental health campaign called Heads Together, which focused on not just veterans. There was 11 charities within there. 4 were veteran charities, but there was young children, teenagers, postnatal depression, the whole spectrum. And so I set a target of £1 million, which Alana did, was working on. Alana and I sort of planned the whole project. The world record was 117 days. I had about 15 months to train.
How old was the record? What the previous record holder?
So when I applied for the world record, there was a gentleman called Scott Napier, a Scottish guy, who had the world record. He had it in 126 days. 6 weeks later, when Guinness came back and said, you've been successful, it'd already been beaten now by a Mexican guy called Carlos, who now taken it down to 117 days. So already within that 6 weeks, I thought, 126 days, I've now got 117.
Yeah.
So the record wasn't that long standing.
Okay.
And for me, again, I wasn't a cyclist, but I just took everything I learned from my time in the military, in the private security sector. I knew physically, mentally, I had the right mindset, endurance wise. As long as it wasn't going to hurt my knee, then it shouldn't be an issue. And I just literally took a military set of orders and put it on the project and just crossed out ambition. And just planned it that way out. I spoke to the previous record holders, who were very forthcoming and giving me their information, which was great. They all started in Alaska and finished in Argentina, but all their issues were in South and Central America, bureaucracy, languages, spares for the bikes. So I'm like, as a military guy, I was like, why take a gamble with the second half of the challenge? Why would you not address that early and get it out of the way? So one of the things I was proud of doing, that's what I did. Just because everyone else or the previous record holders went north-south, I went south-north. I turned it on its head. Yeah. And we did the whole planning. Obviously, Harry's team were behind it, so we had all that. And then I set off on 1st of February 2018, and I finished on May the 11th, 2018. I did it in 99 days, 12 hours, and 56.
Did anybody join you for parts of the ride, or did you just do the?
No, so the records with the record stipulates no one's allowed to cycle within like five bike lengths of you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But there was no distinction between supported and unsupported. So I had a support team and a documentary team. So I had a bike mechanic with me, a soft tissue therapist, and things like that. So I was using things that would help me a lot along the way. But when you're planning something like that, 100 plus days, you're going to have issues. But straight away, the winds were so strong. Aberdeen's like living in Chicago. It's the windy city. Used to wind, but nothing like Tierra del Fuego. But I had my targets to hit each day. And I think after the first week, because the winds were so strong, I was 39 miles behind target. But going back slightly, the world record was 117 days. I was aiming for 110. And it wasn't because I wanted to smash it by a week. In the military, we call it fudge. We give ourselves a little bit of fudge or leeway. So should something happen that it's not eating into our time. So I'd looked at all the potential scenarios that could happen on this challenge and looked at all the potential contingencies, and not really any contingencies. You still got to get to A to B. But should there be natural disasters, coups? I think 4 weeks after cycling through Nicaragua, there was a coup. I just missed the coup by 4 weeks. If we had any for that, it was eating into that week, not into the challenge. So by the end of the first week, I was 39 miles behind target, but I was still a week ahead of the world record. And from then on, it was just gains. And I had a tailwind all the way through Peru. That's 2,500 kilometers of tailwind. Jeez. And I crashed the bike. I had food poisoning twice. But again, physically and mentally, I was getting stronger as I was going along on the bike. You can't replicate those situations when you're training. You can get yourself to a good baseline. But as I was progressing, I was getting fitter and stronger. And then, obviously another curveball on this, I got into North America. I took 10 days off the South America world record. in Cartagena. But going from south to north actually was a great decision from a cycling perspective. I had a great tailwind helping me. But logistics-wise, we're having to change the vehicle in every country. Every border crossing, we're having to swap the vehicles, which was slowing us up. So my wife, Alana, was the campaign director. She rang me when I was in Ecuador and told me that we had a RV and a 4x4 bought in Fort Lauderdale and was going to get shipped to Panama. And then when I finished the South America World Record, we fly over to Panama, collect this vehicle, and it takes us all the way to Alaska, which should enable us to speed up. And she said that the vehicles hadn't been loaded onto the shipping container and they're stuck in Fort Lauderdale. So thankfully for me, my wife, my PA, and two of our friends flew out and they drove the vehicles 4,000 miles in 8 days from Fort Lauderdale to Panama.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, I broke the world record in the morning at 8 o'clock. Got the noon flight from Cartagena to Panama. And then an hour later, Alana comes in with the vehicles, hands the keys, and then we're off. So we were now, already taken one world record 10 days ahead. By the time I got into Del Rio in Texas, I think it's like getting to a war RV, Garrett. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because everyone spoke my language. The culinary options were better. The fact that having spoken to the previous record holders, all the issues should now be behind us and we should be on the home straight. So it was a huge relief, just not for just me, but the documentary team, the support team as well as we got in. But after an hour of getting into Texas, I had 5 missed calls off Alana. And Alana's very good in keeping distractions away. So I knew it was important and I thought it was something wrong with our kids. And so I rang her and she told me we'd been invited to Harry and Meghan's wedding, the royal wedding. I said, well, that's nice. And she goes, no, you don't understand. Your last flight back is day 102. So going into the phone call, I was 14 days ahead. 10 minutes later, I'm now a day behind.
Yeah.
So I had to sort of change the way that I cycled. But I had the luxury in North America, which I didn't have in South and Central, is being able to cycle at night. Now, we had to be off the road for safety reasons.
Right.
Yeah, I just basically played chess with Mother Nature with the winds. Because I got to Lubbock, had a day of 60-mile-an-hour winds and tornadoes, which has just grounded me for another 24 hours. So I was now 2 days behind. And so, yeah, just played chess with Mother Nature. And I was supposed to have cycled it in 17 days. I did it in 11 and a half days from Texas to Canada.
Jeez. You did Texas to Canada in 11 days.
In 11 days, yeah.
Wow.
But I used the wind to my advantage as well. Most of the cycling was at night. I had to cycle 340 miles in the next 36 hours to get out of Lubbock. Got to Cheyenne in Wyoming and picked up a beautiful tailwind and did 270 miles in 11 hours.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's insane.
That's awesome.
You can do the math on that. So I'm the obvious question that I'm sure everybody's listening is asking. Like, you did not walk normal at that wedding, did you? You were probably the only person there, like waddling around with sore legs and sore bum.
Yeah, well, I finished on the 11th of May. I lost. I started the challenge. I carried on weighing 200 pounds. I didn't change that. I knew that. I sort of took my experiences. I wasn't a cyclist, but I knew that this challenge was almost like a polar expedition. You're losing weight from the day that you start to the day you finish. So on selection, I always tell guys, don't go on there 100% fit because you'll burn out by week 2 or 3, and, the cycling world, they like to be 100% fit, for their races, 2 to 3% body fat. But you're opening yourself up to illness as well. So I always say carry a bit of weight, go on there 75, 80% fit. And then as you're burning that fat, you're slowly getting fitter. So that was my mindset going into this. So I started it at 90 kilos. I finished at 78 kilos. I lost 12 kilos on the bike ride. So even when Alana rang me and told me about the wedding, she goes, I need your sizes for the morning suit. I said, well, I said, I can give you sizes now, but I'm going to be a different size by the time I get there. So literally every third day I was having to give him my new sizes as I was going through America. And so, yeah, you're right though. When I got there, broke the world record on the 11th. We landed on the 17th back in London, and the wedding was like the 19th. I still hadn't really come to terms with the fact that what I'd achieved, I was also still trying to get used to being around my family, to then all of a sudden having the whole world's press wanting to do interviews. So for me, I really would have liked to have appreciated what I'd done and absorbed that for a good to 3 weeks before I then had the next big high so soon afterwards.
Seriously. Yeah.
When did it sink in for you finally after you'd finished all of that?
It probably wasn't until I got home, because I still hadn't been home. I went straight to London. I hadn't even got back to Scotland at this point. But they actually tell you to taper off, because your heart is a muscle, and so it's grown, and you've literally been training for 18 months. My resting heart rate was something like 45 beats a minute. And
wow.
But also you can go into depression as well, because a lot of athletes have this when they're training for the Olympics or a big event. They train for 4 years, and once it's over, it's like, now what?
Yeah.
And so for me, I was supposed to taper, but I remember going for a bike ride, and I only cycled 10 miles to a coffee shop. And then on the way back, these guys spotted me and wanted a race. So I ended up leaving them and getting a PB for that straight. And I was like, I'm not going to end up tapering. But we had a huge fundraiser 6 weeks later, and Harry was a guest on that one. So literally, I just spent the next 6 weeks working on that, and it was that evening that I really took it all in what we'd achieved.
That's so cool. I can only, by the way, when you pitch the movie rights, you're going to break that coup up in Nicaragua with a bazooka while riding the bike, because that's going to be definitely like Jason Statham's big action scene.
It's interesting because I'd heard about bureaucracy on the borders, but I hadn't seen it in South America. We hadn't really had any issues. The only real issues we had in South America was they were taking some of the food out of the vehicles, which was fine. But Honduras, Nicaragua, those places, there was young guys with guns, no uniforms, and they were literally, going around. So when Alana and Francis and them were driving through, they were literally trying to get briberies. But in the end, they ended up helping them in the end. Obviously, had to give them some cash. But we had we had some challenge bracelets, these rubber bracelets with the Pan American Highway or PAH 18 on.
Yeah.
And so it was great insight for me, because Alana doing that, because we then knew that actually we're going to be held up at these borders. So unlike South America, where I was covering countries between 7 and 11 days, depending on how big they were, on Central America, I was covering countries about a day and a half to 2 days.
Right.
I was flying through them. And so I made sure that we always got to the border at night. So should we be held up by these sort of guys, and it was slowing us up, it was eating into my sleeping time and not the cycling time. But actually, it was quite good. I kept seeing guys with the challenge bracelets on, which I should just go straight for them. I was like, "Oh, you met my wife," and I'm like, "Oh, fuck."
Yeah, that's how you know the friendlies.
Yeah.
So I want to fast forward then. So you then write your book, Relentless. And side note for everybody, we're going to link to it. You should get the book. I mean, obviously, you're listening to Dean's story, and he goes into much more detail in the book. $5 from each sale goes to, what was it? I'm going to mess.
Heroic Hearts.
There it is. I was going to say Heroes Hearts. I knew I had it wrong. So it goes to Heroic Hearts. Do you want to tell people about that real quick? Because I do want to hear the story about how the book came to being.
Yeah, the story about the book or the Heroic Hearts?
Well, yeah, I'd like to hear both, because I mean, I think it's awesome that you're donating from the sale. But I want to hear how do you go from, okay, now I'm going to write a book, right?
I generally didn't. As you touched on earlier on, and the reason I did this is so I had something to be focused and engaged on. So day one of the bike ride, I actually got set up an Instagram account. I'd never even been on social media, so I wasn't even. By the time we'd finished, I did it so I wasn't smuggling people across borders and taking these risks. I never saw a career in guest speaking. I never saw TV opportunities or book opportunities. I didn't even have a website. People only really just started to know who I was, because everything up until that point, because of the sensitivity of what I was doing and people I was working with, I was flying under the radar. No one knew who Dean Stott was. To then all of a sudden, Prince Harry's friend, Special Forces friend breaks world records and things like that. So there wasn't, I never looked at book opportunities, but a good friend of mine, she was helping us do the fundraising event. And she had a good friend who was a publishing agent. And when I sat down with him and sort of told him my story, he's like, within 12 hours, he had a contract written out. He goes, this needs to be, this story needs to be told. So yeah, I was fortunate to have that opportunity. But unlike my wife, who actually generally writes book, I had a ghostwriter, because if it was up to me, we'd still be on chapter 1. But the ghostwriter is a great guy. I was able to interview different ghostwriters, but this guy was ex-military guy, so he understood the terminology, and it just worked as well, because I'm very much almost like a perfectionist. I want to go into details, and he's like, no one cares about that. It's like, we'll skim that bit. So it makes the book a lot smoother and easier to read than if it was for me. So yeah, I got that opportunity, which I was pleased to have. And you probably see behind me, there's two different books. That book there was the UK book, which was launched in 2019. And then I went on, as you mentioned, Jocko's podcast, literally 4 weeks after coming to America in 2020.
Yeah.
And could it have been 18 months since the book had been launched? The British publishers weren't really interested. Because I said, look, I've got this guy's podcast. He's quite big. I've got People magazine, all these media opportunities, and they weren't interested. So Jocko took me to #1 on Kindle. And so my wife, again, being the entrepreneur, reached out to the publishers and said, well, if you've not launched in the US, give me a price for the rights. Yes. So she bought the rights for the US, the whole of North America, Canada as well. And then we sort of changed the book cover because America is all about light and hope. UK is slightly dark, but you'd never be able to have a front cover with all that ammunition wrapped around my neck and guns in the UK. And then we Americanized the book. We got Admiral McRaven, Jocko to endorse it. And, we changed the S to Z and put a couple of other little stories in. Yeah. So there's two.
Correctly is what you mean.
Yeah. That's it. And then always like to get, whatever we do, me and my wife, is always the give back factor where we can. Yeah. So, the Honor Foundation, we're getting $5 per book. Now it's Heroic Hearts. I sit on the board of Heroic Hearts. So I've been introduced to the plant medicine. So with the bike ride, I was focusing on mental health, and it was all about physical activity helping your mental state. Mm-hmm. Whereas now here in the US, in the veteran community, there's a lot of research and there's a lot of good work going in and around the plant medicine. Guys that are literally writing suicide notes to, being fully happy again with their family. But again, I'd never seen that in UK. We're 15 years behind. Marijuana is still illegal there. So, so I ended up going and did the plant medicine in November. I did the ibogaine and DMT, and I've never done any recreational drugs or smoked before in my life. And literally went down, spoke to some SEAL Team 6 guys. They told me about the benefits of it. And so I'm now sort of hopefully flying the flag for them and raising a bit more awareness. And Alana, with her How to Ask for Money consultancy, is helping them raise funds as well.
That's awesome, man. That's so cool. So
I've seen the change that it's had in some of my friends that it had a massive impact on their life. So it's not something that I know a lot about or understand, but what I've seen it do to some people, it's dramatic change.
Yeah, I think for me, I'd spent a lot of time talking about the physical activity aspect. The mental health campaign, I did it because Harry asked me. We were actually going to do it for human trafficking, me and my wife. But when we sort of sat down and chatted about it, it made sense. And for me, where I see is, having now done the ibogaine and stuff myself, is I wanted to experience these, because then people now see me almost as a mental health ambassador. Mm-hmm. I didn't plan on being that. I used to joke when I was in the bike ride, because people straight away would be, when I came up on social media, when I was doing the challenge, people would tell me their stories. And I'm a cyclist, not a psychiatrist. And I used to have to signpost them to the relevant non-profits. But because of the success of it and the story, people can relate to it. So for me, where I was interested in the plant medicine, it wasn't for my own self-healing, which it did help a lot with me. It was being able to, when I go on other podcasts or when I go on the stage and talk about mental health, I have something to reference, and compare. So I had been banging the drum about physical activity, but the way I summarize it is you're almost like a boiling pot on a flame, and physical activity is taking the lid off. It's releasing that steam. Whereas actually the ibogaine or the plant medicine just takes the pot completely off the flame. And I was like, that sort of makes sense. And then there's other ways, there's meditation, there's communication, and there's medication, which is always the last option, which you want to try and avoid.
Yeah, that's so good. So I got 2 more questions, Dean. I appreciate it, man. I really enjoyed this. You have so much to talk about. So, so what's next, man? We talked a little bit about it off air about what's next, but clearly you're not just going to go and put your feet up, and retire. What's your next challenge that you're looking at?
So for me, I said, what the world sees is probably 30% of what I do. 70% of what I do, me and Alana still very much work in the private security sector. We work with some very ultra high net worths, governments, royal families and such. And more recently, I did the evacuations out of Israel, October the 7th, when it went off.
Amazing.
I was actually in Disneyland. October the 8th, I landed in Tel Aviv. And for the first time, a lot of people are like, oh, you're back. You've ended your sabbatical. And I said, I'd never ended the sabbatical. I just never let anyone know that I was in that. So I'm focusing more on building that, especially focusing in around evacuations around the world. But challenges wise, I need to keep moving. I know I'm not getting young. I'm 47 years old now as well. So I'm mindful of the fact that I'll soon be getting old quick. And so for me, I like to take a challenge or a sport I've never done before and find the biggest challenge. So I've enjoyed the cycling. I'm now looking at a water-based challenge next year, and it'll be ocean rowing.
Yeah.
Other than going from one side of the Atlantic or one side of the Pacific to the other, and I was trying to find something that's not been done before, and no one's actually ever rowed the west coast of America. And so I'm going to be rowing from Vancouver in Canada down to Tijuana in the summer of next year.
That's amazing, man.
Yeah, so I'm starting to plan that now. I've just bought a new rowing machine. I need to get that out of the box soon.
5 to 10 minutes
from a year out. A year out, I'll then start training. But again, just taking everything I've learned from the last challenge, and this will be around ocean conservation. So something
nice,
Dean. That's not something to be understated. To say, it's May 2024. And you're serious but joking about, I'm going to get the rowing machine out of the box because next summer I'm going to set another world record in rowing. Just to people who have a desire to, accomplish great things in their life, what would you say that you could encourage somebody else and say, like, look, you could pull the equipment out of the box today and a year from now maybe accomplish world record. What's something you could say to encourage someone who has dreams of doing things like you do?
One thing I used to use as a phrase when I was an instructor on the commando course, and it's very relatable to everything, is that anticipation is worse than participation. A lot of people will make an excuse of why or delay it. I can't do it. I'm too busy at the moment. But then when they actually do it and then look back on reflection, like, it actually wasn't that bad. Even like Special Forces selection, you hear these horror stories, but then when you're on it, yeah, it's hard. But then when you look back, you're like, that wasn't that difficult. And I say that about the bike ride. There were dark days and hard days. On reflection, it was fine. But anyone who's doing something, I always say you need to set. Now, for me, I'd have to tell the world that I'm doing it, because I tell the world I'm doing it, then I'm doing it. Yeah. You know what I mean? So for me, I tell the world I'm doing it, and I set a date, and then I work back from that. And so the anticipation is worse than participation, and always look to the experts for help. When I did the bike ride, I reached out to the previous record holders. It's amazing how many people are willing to help you. If you're doing it for doing it for the right reasons as well. So that's why I always like the give back factor. It makes it easier for me to have conversations if I'm doing this for ocean conservation or mental health or veterans mental health. So, yeah, I think a lot of people, again, it's back to that self-belief. They don't believe they're capable of doing it. And I say, don't compare yourself to others. There's a guy called Mark Beaumont who cycle around the world in 80 days, and he goes, Mark does this or that. Yeah, but I'm not Mark. I'm sorry, I'm not Mark. I'll do it slightly different. We talked earlier about a famous bike ride in UK called Land's End John O'Groats. Yeah, which is one end of the country to the other. I'd only cycled 2 weeks before I decided to go do that. I never even cycled, and then people, you're not even bike ready yet. I mean,
800 miles. Yeah, sorry. That's 800 miles for the Americans out there that don't know.
Yeah, I think it's equivalent of cycling from Los Angeles to Portland in Oregon. But for me, I had to do it because it was the Pan American Highway. A lot of people get the Pan American Highway mixed up with the Race Across America, which is 3,000 miles. And this is 14,000. So for the Land's End John O'Groats, it was equivalent of 15 of them back to back. So mentally, I had to be able to at least do one.
Yeah, very good. Do you get comparisons to David Goggins a lot?
I do, actually. Yeah, a lot of people said you are the British David Goggins, and I disagree because I don't swear as much.
I told Nick,
un-British, man.
I told Nick, you're the British David Goggins, but you're nicer, like in the right type of way, and you do stuff outside of physical events, right? Like,
exactly.
All respect to Goggins, but he's also not running a tier 1 paramilitary operation on the side.
Exactly. Yeah, I probably I don't swear as much. He could probably do with the medicine. But for me, I think for me is that what I try to prove to people here is the fact that, a lot of people, like in the military, you manage to get from, told that you would last 2 minutes. I mean, you managed to get to a tier 1 operator. So you got to the top of your game there. You've then obviously had an injury and you've had to start over again in the corporate world. And then I got to the top there.
Yeah.
And so some people say, that can be a bit of luck. So what I was trying to prove to people wrong here is actually, I'll take a sport I've never done before and do exactly the same. So really the crossovers, the crossovers between all three are the same. It's just about the right mindset, planning, having the right team around you. And that's what I was trying to promote here. Whatever you do, it doesn't matter whether it's sport, corporate, military.
It's good, Dean.
Yeah. It'll be the best. And it's never too late to start a sport and be good at sport. I started cycling at the age of 40 and broke the world records at 41. I'll start rowing at the age of 47. I'll break the world record at 48.
Nice. I love that, man. I hope everybody, because you said it so clear, but I just want to highlight it again because that's so good. Mindset, planning, team. Like it's so simple, but it's simple, not easy.
Dean said it. That's where, just to summarize, really, it starts with the belief. That's where Dean started as a young man. Starts with the belief, and then you get in the right. And the military teaches you, if you get around the right people, learn some of the right experiences, you can do absolutely anything. And so it took Dean years to do it the first time, but now he's realized, I just need the belief. I need the experts. I need a plan, and I can accomplish anything.
I love that, man. All right, Dean, last question, man. I so appreciate your time. So the Netflix show that's out right now, it's only been out for a couple of weeks as of the time of this recording. So actually, like just over a week. So it's Toughest Forces on Earth. It looks amazing. We both watched the first few episodes. It's a lot of fun, but I'm curious. Obviously, you've done all this stuff for real. So I'm curious, what was the most surprising?
Not the TV version,
right? Not the TV version where they're like, okay, cut, we're gonna get a different angle. But like, what was the your most surprising experience, toughest experience, and fun experience on that?
So I just got this. My youngest has just come in. We're gonna.
Oh yeah.
There we go.
Hey, what's going on, man?
Hi, buddy.
What's up? How old is he?
Say hi, yeah.
He's like, what is going on?
Actually, she looks like a boy now. She's a bruiser. Yeah. No. She's got just a diaper on. Yeah, she's a bruiser. We'll say goodbye. She's 20 months. This is an American born and bred. My other two are born in Scotland.
No kidding. Yeah, she's big. Yeah, 20 months. Gotta be proud of her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She'll be rowing with me next year. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
I believe it.
Yeah. So there she goes. Sorry, I have to repeat the question of it.
No, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. So I was just saying, obviously, you've done all this stuff for real on the So for Toughest Forces on Earth, what was like the most surprising, the toughest, and the funnest experience that you had?
Yeah, so for me, being the older one, like I say, it's like Top Gear with guns. I'm like the grumpy Jeremy Clarkson, who's probably done it all. So for me, it was a lot of, I'd done everything that we did on the show anyway. So it was sort of like, picking up or a bit of revision. The only thing I didn't do was the Malaysian swamp survival, which you see on episode 4, I think it is, or 5. Yeah. So for me, it was nice to see. It was nice to test myself because I told her I could never run again. So then actually, for me, the biggest surprise was how skill fade. You have a bit of skill fade, but actually, it doesn't take long before you've got that muscle memory back and you're back in the team. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. At the age of 47, I didn't think I was going to be doing spy rigging and falling through the ice again in the Arctic. And so I thoroughly enjoyed that. But it really opened my eyes up to all these other units around the world. And it wasn't because I was arrogant when I was in the Special Forces. I literally only just not cared about, but I only really had exposure to those that I'd worked with, whether it's CTS, Delta, SEAL Team 6, the SEALs, I knew them, but I wasn't aware about all these other units around the world. The big one that caught me out was Austria, the YAG Commando, who are a tier 1 unit. I'd never heard of them, but the capabilities and, the experience these guys had was amazing. So that really opened my eyes. That was good. And then also every unit that we visited had some influence either from the UK or the US. They were either trained by the Brits or the Americans. And so I thoroughly enjoyed that. The hardest thing for me was there wasn't really anything on there that stood out, was actually going from one climate to another one. 1 minute we're in the Arctic doing Arctic survival, the SEER course in minus 30. I mean, 2 weeks later, I'm in the jungle in Colombia sweating. It's plus 30. And so So as you know, the toll it has on the body. So we filmed on 5 continents in quite a short period of time as well. So for me was, my wife ended up being the sports nutritionist for the show, because it was having a toll on our bodies, not just the travel, but the culinary options that we had available. But it's a great show, really. It's just for the listeners. We free hosts go around the world and we showcase what's unique about unit special forces, whether geographically where they're placed, the environments that they operate in, or maybe the threats that they have as a nation. Jordan, right in the middle of quite a hot zone where they are. In Colombia, it's the cartel. So their enemy is within their own countries, and then the various weapon systems that they have, but also then the crossovers and synergies between all the units. Their mindset. So I had fun filming it, and it seems to be doing well.
Yeah, well, we'll hope that we'll get to see another season, because who knows what else they're going to have you guys do.
Yeah, so go check out Toughest Forces on Earth on Netflix. It's very entertaining.
Very good. Dean, well, hey, we know that your little girl wants you back. She came in to let you know it was time to wrap up the podcast. No, don't even apologize, man. We both got kids. We're going to take the orders. But thank you so much for being on with us, man. We really enjoyed it. You can follow Dean on Instagram at Dean Stott. We're going to put all the links to his website, his Instagram. You can just track Dean. And when he gets out there next year on the rower, you'll be like, hey, I listened to that guy when he was just talking about getting a rowing machine out of the box, and now he's somewhere off the coast of San Francisco. So should be fun. Yeah, exactly. All right, Dean. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nick.